Hello, my name is Mr. B. Today I would like to read for you a special short story written by Reddit user Turnaround0101 as a writing prompt response on reddit.com/r/writing prompts. They have been generous enough to let me narrate their story. The image on screen depicts the specific writing prompt for the story. I hope you enjoy. While cleaning, you find an old dusty flag with a colorful pattern of leaves and flowers in a box of your late grandmother's things. Thinking it festive, you clean and hang it up outside for spring. You didn't know that it was an invitation for fey creatures to shelter in for the night. It was bedtime for Yvette Wilkins, or it would have been if not for the scratching. She'd nodded off and then snapped back awake twice now, and she was certain it was getting louder. Scratch, 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 scratch. There it was again, from the window on the far side of the room, the one overlooking her small herb garden. Scratch, 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 scratch. She was too old for monsters in the night, but when they scratched at second-story windows, even she could make an exception. Yvette pulled the covers a little tighter around her neck, burrowing in as if she were a child again. But she wasn't a child. She was 26 and living alone, and she was not about to accept condescension from anyone, most of all herself. That didn't change the fact that she shivered terribly when she got out of bed and reached for her tennis racket, but there were compromises in everything. What was most important was that she was up. Scratch, 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 scratch. Yvette reached the window. The noise was loud now, coming from the wood siding on the right. She raised her tennis racket, taking a deep breath, and she slid the window up.
Miss Magdalene?
A reedy voice said from the other side. Yvette dropped the racket, the breath whooshing out of her. Who's there?" she shouted. She was beginning to regret her earlier courage. The covers seemed so much more inviting. A face appeared in the window, illuminated only by the soft yellow glow of Yvette's bedside lamp. It was a creature of some kind, not a person. She realized with sudden shock. Through the shadows that clung to its skin, she could see the creature was old and wrinkly, with tufts of white hair sprouting from a small, but altogether too human head. Its eyes were too large for the skull, like big luminescent pools with shocking green irises. The largest pair of ears she had ever seen were set off from the head in long drooping lines.
Miss Magdalene?
The creature said again. It sounded hopeful, almost yearning.
Is that you? It's been so long.
Magdalene? Yvette stammered. That had been her grandmother's name. The creature squinted at her, something dimming in those shining eyes.
No, you're not, are you?
It said sadly.
Where did you get her flag?
Her flag? Yvette yelped in surprise as the creature reached out a finger towards the window screen. Something gleamed at the end of it, a long, sharp nail, more of a talon than anything else. It sliced through the screen as if it weren't there, and then in one smooth motion the creature hurled itself into her room, standing before her on spindly legs, its arms so long the fingers nearly touched the ground. It couldn't have been more than 4 feet tall, but Yvette had never been so intimidated in all her life.
Where did you get her flag?
The creature repeated, advancing on her. She glanced towards the tennis racket, cursing herself for dropping it, then cursing herself again for thinking it might do any good against a creature with nails like that. Suddenly it hit her which flag it must have been talking about. She dug up one from her grandmother's old cottage the last time she had been there. A dusty, threadbare thing with a flower and bloom stitched in the center. It was hung up beside her herb garden now. She'd hoped it would bring her luck. It was my grandmother's, Yvette said. Magdalene Wilson. That's who you're looking for, right? The creature paused, sniffing the air, its brow furrowed in a horrific mask of wrinkles before it stalked closer, sniffing again. Its nose was long and drooping, just like the ears, and when it got close, she could feel the tip brushing against her. Yes, it said.
You have her scent, after a fashion.
It pulled back from her, and when it did, Yvette realized there was intelligence in its eyes.
Has she returned to the earth, then?
She died some time ago, if that's what you're asking.
A pity. A great pity.
There was a long silence then, as the pair assessed each. Yvette's tense muscles were screaming at her. She'd been torn between fighting and running from the moment it had stepped in.
You know nothing of the Alpha, do you, child?
The creature said finally.
Miss Magdalene had said she might not pass her secrets on.
A hardly knew my grandmother. She had a falling out with my parents when I was young. I hadn't even been to her cottage before my mother inherited it.
Another pity. She was a great woman and a great friend once.
The creature sat folding in on itself in a strange caricature of a lotus pose.
Would you like to learn of her?
There was something about its pose that was soothing. It wasn't one singular thing. The creature didn't retract its awful knife-like fingers or become suddenly more human. It was in the small things. It folded its hands neatly in its lap, lowering its small pointed chin to its chest. Its breathing stilled, becoming nearly silent as it waited for her answer. And Yvette noticed an earthy scent in the air as if she dug her fingers into fertile soil. Her muscles relaxed and slowly, incredibly, she moved to sit on the bed.
An excellent choice, child.
The creature raised its head, nodding once, and then placing its right hand upon its chest and bowing towards her.
I am Erlen, son of Merd.
Yvette, she said softly. It all felt like something out of a dream.
Miss Yvette,
Erlen repeated to himself. On his lips, her name sounded foreign, moving in strange and exciting ways.
Miss Yvette, your grandmother was a remarkable woman, though she was scarcely more than a child when we met. We were of an age in those years, if you could believe a creature such as me has ever been young.
Erlen made a watery hiccuping noise, and for a moment the spell Yvette felt she was under broke. She reached out to him in surprise and was only stopped by his look of puzzlement. "You're laughing!" she exclaimed when she realized what it was. Erlen looked back at her gruffly. His lips pursed into a tiny little line that made her giggle. He waited for her to finish, and when she finally did, Yvette felt chastened just by his silence.
I will not have you dishonoring my memories,
he said. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to. It's all just so strange."
You chose to fly our flag. You invited this conversation whether you knew it or not. Hold your tongue, you know not at what you laugh.
Yes, sir, she said quietly. The strange hiccuping sounded again, and this time Yvette returned the favor and let him finish.
In my land, I am no sir,
Erlen said,
though Miss Magdalene never saw the difference. Close your eyes, child, and let yourself hear the tale of our meeting and the flag you now fly. It was a cold day when I met Miss Magdalene, and on the wrong side of the solstice, when my kind are at our weakest. She looked much different than you do. Her coloring was more fair, her hair was like fire. By the standards of your people, I am told she was quite beautiful. Such things were neither here nor there to me. Miss Magdalene, from the first moment we met to the day we parted, was a woman defined by her kindness. Her bravery, too, for she had that in spades. But for me, in a moments I have remembered her, it was her kindness.
Erlen paused, and through closed eyes Yvette imagined him shifting, catching the quiet rustle of his simple clothing. When he spoke again, his voice shook for a moment.
I have remembered her often. It saddens me to know she has passed. In those days, my world was far different than it is now, and I played a different role in it. The day we met, I had lost even that, for I was running from home, pounding headlong through the snow, barely ahead of the creatures who chased me. Svarts, we called them. They are gone now. It is a blessing. I had run a long time, farther than I had ever before. I'd never even spent a night above ground until that day, and when I finally ran headlong into Miss Magdalene, I'd passed 2 moons and wouldn't have made it through a third. And run into her I did. I was nearly blind from my exertions, but then I rounded the bole of a prodigious oak, only to crash into her. She fell with a great squeal. The firewood she had been gathering scattered across the yard. I could sense my pursuers behind me, watching, waiting. They would have been unsure what to do. There were taboos against meeting humans then. There still are, in fact, in places not marked by the flag.
Yvette's ears burned in embarrassment, but she had no regrets now.
Miss Magdalene stood grasping a stout log in her hand and brandished it at me. I believe she shouted something as well, though I was too far gone to understand. I think she saw something in me then, something that stilled her hand. I must have looked a misshapen monster to her, especially in the dying light, but she let me live. I woke up in her cottage. She must have carried me there. In the state I was in, I am certain it ruined her dress. I was next to the fireplace, propped up in a rocking chair, and a blanket so heavy over me I could barely move, weak as I was.
The blanket, Yvette said suddenly. Her eyes snapped open as she went to her closet, digging down into the trunk of things she had taken from the cottage. She pulled something out, laughing in triumph, and turned back to Erland. He was crying.
The blanket,
he said, and the weight of years was behind it. He rose on unsteady feet and walked towards her, reaching out his small hands to take it from her. It was an old work, the kind of thing that in any more closely knit family would have been a treasured heirloom. Yvette had found it next to the flag. They had the same blooming flower pattern.
She kept it,
Erland said, tears still running down his face.
Oh, Miss Magdalene.
It's yours now. Take it with you when you leave. Yvette thought she'd never seen anyone quite so happy as Erland was at that. Yvette went back to the bed, and Erland, now swathed in the blanket, resumed his story.
I woke up under this very blanket,
he said.
After having felt like I would never be warm again, Miss Magdalene nursed me back to health herself, feeding me for days without a word spoken in recompense. She was scared of me at first, of course. Any human would have been, but in those days some of your kind were still close to the old ways. Miss Magdalene was one such. She could snare a rabbit or butcher a pig, nurse the sick and tend the wounded, all with the same hands that made wonders such as this.
He stroked the blanket lovingly.
On the third day I learned something even more wondrous, however. She could befriend any creature that would allow her to try, and she would defend her friends viciously, whether she knew their plight or not. The Savate attacked on the third day, and I was still too weak to fight them.
Another pause, a heavy moment.
You see, Miss Yvette, a determined human to a Savate, or an Alfar, is something like a troll would be to you.
A troll? Yvette squealed. Do they exist too?
Oh, yes. There are tales of those too, though not tonight. In any case, a human can be like a troll to creatures like us. Svarts were of a size with me and nearly as quick. They were trained and disciplined warriors and fanatical in their devotion to the priest. Things like that pale in comparison to a being that outweighs them so heavily. There are reasons my kind hide. As it happened, the Savate snuck in through a window while I slept, not unlike the events of tonight.
Yvette heard that hiccuping sound again.
I'd have been dead if Miss Magdalene hadn't heard them at the last moment. She came charging out of the kitchen with a rolling pin and a banshee scream. Crushed the first one before I was truly even awake, helmet and all. After the first Svart fell, she exchanged the rolling pin for a fireside poker. The effects were quite gruesome.
My God, Yvette whispered. Grandma really did that?
Oh, that and more, child, that and more. There's a reason the flag now flies her arms.
Her arms?
The Dahlia,
he said, pointing to the flower on the blanket.
We called her that in the days to come, red days when she came to know the Svarts well and the Alfar better, days when our friendship blossomed like her flowers.
Yvette leaned in, hanging on his words. The Dahlia, she breathed. Grandma Magdalene? Really? Erland nodded solemnly.
My kind will mourn her passing. She was a great woman.
Erland turned back to the window. Outside, the firm rays of morning were beginning to break over the horizon.
I have stayed too long,
he said.
I had reason to be on the surface beyond the call of the flag. There are people who will miss me if I do not return.
The feeling that had ensnared her shattered as Erland unwrapped himself from the blanket. He folded it neatly, his sharp-pointed fingers remarkably careful on the fabric. No, it's yours, Yvette said, reaching out to stop him when she realized what he did. His skin was leathery and cool to the touch.
Not yet, though I dearly wish it to be.
Erilyn looked up at her, holding the folded blanket out to her.
Someday I hope you will offer it to me then, perhaps on the day the tale is completed. Until then, let it be a surety against my return. You wish the tale finished, do you not?
Yvette nodded eagerly. That night felt like a fever dream that she desperately wished not to wake from.
Then keep it safe for me, and when the nights are fair, keep a window open. I have developed a fondness for nighttime since the days I spoke of. Miss Magdalene was a part of that as well.
Erilyn jumped onto the bed, standing upright while she stayed seated. He made his bow once more, then pressed a single nail to his chest and then to hers.
Goodbye, Miss Yvette. I will return.
He was gone out the window a moment later. Dawn came for Yvette too soon, but sleep never did. This concludes the response, written originally by Reddit user Turnaround0101. If you like this short story, or would like to hear other short stories, please let me know. Your feedback and appreciation means so much to me, and I'd love to hear back from you. Thank you for listening, and until next time.